Do you use masking fluid in your watercolour paintings, or have you heard about it and not used it yet and wonder how you should? It can be really handy for keeping whites and light areas, or it can rip your painting to shreds when you try to take it off. So masking fluid, love it or hate it. My name's Liz Chaderton. I'm a professional watercolour artist based in Berkshire, and every week I share a tip, trick or technique that I wish someone had told me when I started painting. And this week I want to share my top 8 do's and my top 8 don'ts of masking fluid. Hi, so today we're going to look at masking fluid, and I have got 8, I hope, don'ts and 8 do's and 1 little bonus. So masking fluid is basically a latex solution that you put on paper when you're watercolouring to protect the white of the paper. It dries, you paint over it, you can rub it off. That's what it is. So my first tip is don't use it. It leaves a really hard mark and it can rip your paper. So if there's an alternative, look for it. The second thing of my don'ts is don't shake your bottle. So say it's latex, and with time it will just congeal into a lump. So one day you'll open your bottle, there'll be a lump of gooey mess in it, and you just need to chuck it away. That's the natural process. Shaking it encourages that coagulation. My bonus tip is don't smell it. It smells of ammonia and it's horrible. Oh, look. You know, I said it congeals into a lump. We just look. There's a lovely lump of the stuff. Anyway, don't smell it is my bonus tip. So that's what it looks like, and I am going to remove that lump. Let's just get rid of that. So my next tip is you can dilute it. Do dilute it. If when you pour it out of the bottle it looks a bit thick, dilute it. If you've got white masking fluid, you can actually tint it. Let's just find a quick bit of watercolour to make it easier to see on your paper. So you can tint it. If you've got white, you can buy blue or pink if you want to. Next is don't put it on wet paper. It will soak into the fibres and be really hard to remove. Next tip, don't use your decent watercolour brushes to put it on. It clogs up the fibres, you'll never get it off. If you really need to use a brush, say the shape you want needs to be a brush, get a really strong solution of washing up liquid and water. Put your brush in the washing up liquid, don't rinse it, then put it in your masking fluid, back into the washing up liquid, back into the masking fluid, and that will protect your brush. But you can get these, they're called colour shapers. Let's just clean off the end of that. So you can see it, they're a little silicone wedge, and you can get these, and when it's dried on there you just peel it off and that's great. You can get, let's just find this is a masking fluid brush, so supposedly it's easier to remove the masking fluid from that. You could use, depending what shape mark you need, cocktail stick. What I quite like using is a cotton bud. Cut off one end so you've got a sharp thin line, and you've got the thicker line for putting blobs on. You can use a mapping pen or a dip pen. Anything, just not your best watercolour brushes. Right, let's start putting this on. I thought, oh gosh, I've just put a nasty big blob on this one. Never mind. Thought what I'd do is a corn, or an ear of barley, I should say. It's not corn, ear of barley, because it's got these beautiful fine hairs, and of course you couldn't paint round those. So I've put on the little grains with that cotton bud, and now I'm going to put in the stalk, and the fun bit is these little thin hairs coming out of each grain. Now this, actually, I've just thought of something else. Oh gosh, another bonus. If you put the wrong mark on, so like you saw, I had a big splodge of masking fluid there from the bottom of this container, don't panic, just let it dry and you can peel it off, no problem. The one thing I do like using masking fluid for is a little bit of splatter, little fine dots of white. You can see a few of them over here, love those. So let's put a few on there. My next tip to you is let it dry. It needs to be dry before you paint over it, because otherwise what happens is that you go to paint over it and your nice paintbrush will pick up that masking fluid and it'll get stuck in your nice paintbrush. Next tip is don't use a hairdryer. Hairdryer sort of bakes the masking fluid into the paper, cooks it on and makes it really hard to remove. So you've just got to be patient. That also leads to the next tip. Don't leave it on your paper too long. A day, that's no problem. A few days, even up to a week. But if you leave it for much longer than that, it again just sort of binds to the paper and will be so hard to remove. So masking fluid, get it on, let it dry, do what you need, get it off the paper. So patience is going to be our friend here. I'm going to make a cup of tea and come back and show you when that's dry. Just to prove I was patient, there is my cup of tea. So let's check whether it's dry. And it's as simple as, does it come off on your finger? My next tip to you is make sure when you paint, you get enough contrast. You've gone through a lot of hassle to get your whites onto the paper. So if you painted very pale washes, the white's not going to show up. There isn't a lot of point. And while I'm about it, there was something else I suddenly thought, oh, I must tell you. What was it? Oh, I know. Yeah, if you look at this and think, oh, that's a mess. I wish I didn't have some of those marks. Maybe this big blob. Peel it off very gently before you paint. Let's paint. We'll go for different colour combinations this time. Just very loose, wet in wet on the background. I'm going to have a green field of barley this time. Well, green, blue, yellow, lots of lovely colours. If I did this very gently and sort of ethereally, if that's such a word, then it wouldn't show up. I wouldn't, all those whites would just be lost, which is fine if that's what you want, but it could be really disappointing. Obviously you don't have to be quite as dark as this, but I'm just showing for demonstration purposes. Now, we've got to be patient again, which is most disappointing. We've got to let this paint dry. If you try and remove your masking fluid while the paint is wet or even damp, you're going to smudge it. So you need to let that paint dry. So that gives me a chance to maybe have my cup of tea. How nice. This is now dry. Just use the back of your hand to check if your painting's dry. If it's cold, it means there's still fluid in the paper, but that's good. So how do we remove masking fluid? My next don't tip is don't be gung-ho about it. Don't just try and rip it off just in case it does damage the surface. You can either just use your finger, rub it across, and it will come off very easily like this, or if you don't like the feel of that, you can use an eraser and it just picks it up and you can remove the masking fluid. I personally prefer to use my thumb or my finger. Just go careful, particularly if it's quite thick in places, just that it doesn't rip your paper. If it starts to rip your paper, come back from the opposite direction to sort of smooth it down. This is a good chance to remove any pencil lines as well, if you had pencil there. We've got our white marks. I see a lot of beginners just kind of leaving it at this point and going, oh yeah, that's what I've got. You don't have to accept what the masking fluid has given you. So you might think, actually, that's all far too hard, those edges. I want to soften them off. So use a short, flat brush, make sure it's damp, not wet, and you could soften off some edges there. Just dab away any pigment that you've loosened off. If you've got any sort of odd shapes that you don't like, you could use this as an opportunity just to get rid of them, soften edges, or whatever's appropriate for you. Even extend some of those little white lines if we wanted to by doing a bit of lifting out. So that's the next tip, is don't just leave it as it is. And then my final tip is paint into it, integrate it into your picture. So in this case I'm going to use my little rigger. I don't want to cover up all these white marks for very obvious reasons, but I can just sort of integrate, bring bits out, maybe put in a few more of these lovely hairs that you get on the wild grasses, or say I think this is barley. Let's bring a bit more yellow in, and then just let that mix, or whatever you want to do, but don't just accept that stark white that it gives you. And those are, I think, if I've counted correctly, 8 do's and 8 don'ts, but there might have been a few extra in there. Hope you found that useful. If you did, please like and subscribe, and maybe even hit that little bell so that you know when the next video is coming out. I'll try to do one every week. Bye for now.